Happy Saturday, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. And if you're new here, thanks for joining us. We're on this awesome journey to hit 10k subscribers by next year. And every like, comment and subscription brings us closer to making that happen. Your support means the world to me. Now let's dive into today's video. The methane rain drummed against our landing module's hull, creating an eerie symphony that none of us were prepared for. Through the reinforced viewport, Titan's orange haze stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by the dark ripples of Kraken Mare, a vast sea of liquid hydrocarbons that would become our home for the next 6 months. I pressed my hand against the cold metal wall, feeling the vibrations of this alien world through our supposedly impenetrable shelter, and for the first time since launch, real fear began creeping into my thoughts. Dr. Reeves? Environmental readings? Captain Ezra Bishop's voice cut through my contemplation. Even after our 14-month journey, she maintained that crisp, professional tone that had earned her command of humanity's first manned mission to Saturn's largest moon. I turned to my console, watching as streams of data painted a picture of the hostile world outside. Temperature holding at negative 179 degrees Celsius, atmospheric pressure at 1.5 times Earth's sea level. Methane concentration in the atmosphere is exactly as expected. We're good to proceed with the EVA prep, Captain. Across the module, Dr. Astrid Voss was already suiting up, her movements precise and practiced. The atmospheric scientist had spent 15 years developing the specialized suits we'd need to survive on Titan's surface. Now, watching her methodically check each seal and connection, I could see both pride and apprehension in her eyes. The descent was rougher than anticipated, Dr. Phoenix Thorne commented, their fingers dancing across the engineering station's haptic interface. Landing strut 3 is showing stress microfractures. Nothing critical, but we'll need to reinforce it before we establish the permanent base camp. Phoenix had always been the practical one, finding problems before they became disasters. Dr. Dante Aldridge stood at the geology station, his tall frame hunched over core sample readouts from our landing site. "The ground composition is fascinating," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "The methane ice matrices are far more complex than our probe suggested. There are structures here that that we didn't expect to find." The Prometheus, our home for the past 14 months, hung in orbit above us, a lifeline to Earth that felt increasingly tenuous. The landing module, officially designated TLM-1, but nicknamed Icarus by the crew, had performed flawlessly during our descent through Titan's thick atmosphere. Now it served as our temporary shelter while we established the first human outpost on this distant world. Captain Bishop moved to the center of the module, her presence commanding attention without effort. "Listen up, people. We've trained for this moment for 3 years. Everything we do from this point forward will be written in history books. Dr. Reeves, you and Dr. Voss will conduct the first EVA. Your primary objective is to deploy the atmospheric processors and begin site preparation for the main habitat. Dr. Thorne will monitor your systems from here while Dr. Aldrich continues analyzing the landing site data." I caught Astrid's eye as we both nodded our acknowledgement. We had rehearsed this sequence countless times in NASA's Titan simulation chamber, but this was different. This was real. The suit-up procedure took 45 minutes. Each piece of our EVA gear was specifically designed for Titan's unique environment. The outer layer was a complex membrane that could withstand both the extreme cold and the corrosive effects of liquid methane. Beneath that, a network of heating elements and pressure regulators worked to maintain a survivable environment for our bodies. "Remember," Astrid said as she helped me secure my helmet, "the atmospheric density means you'll feel more resistance to movement than in our Earth-based training. Don't fight it. Work with it." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had dedicated their life to understanding this alien world. The airlock cycle began, and I watched as the pressure gauges adjusted to match Titan's atmosphere. Through my helmet's heads-up display, I could see my vital signs steady and strong. The outer door opened with a hydraulic hiss, and for the first time, we faced the raw reality of Titan's surface. The landscape before us defied easy description. Pools of liquid methane dotted the ice field, their surfaces disturbed by the continuous rain of hydrocarbons from the orange-brown sky above. In the distance, Kraken Mare stretched to the horizon, its dark surface occasionally reflecting the faint light of Saturn, barely visible through the thick atmosphere. "First boot about to touch down," I announced, my voice steadier than I felt. "One small step for—" "Really, Callum?" Astrid's laugh crackled through the comm. "That's what you're going with?" I smiled despite myself. Had to try. My boot pressed into the surface, and I felt the crunch of methane ice beneath my feet. The surface was firmer than expected, supporting my weight with only minimal give. Each step left distinct impressions. The first human footprints on this distant moon. We began moving equipment from the landing module's external storage bays, setting up the atmospheric processes that would help us better understand Titan's complex chemistry. The work was methodical but challenging. The resistance Astrid had warned about was very real. Every movement felt like pushing through thick syrup. That's when we noticed the first anomaly. What we initially took for natural formations in the ice began to show patterns. Subtle at first, but impossible to ignore once spotted. Lines and curves that were too regular, too purposeful to be natural. "Dr. Aldrich," I called over the comm. "Are you seeing this through the suit cameras?" "Affirmative." His voice was tense with excitement. "Whatever you do, don't disturb those formations. We need to document everything exactly as we found it." But something else had caught my attention. In the distance, where the methane rain fell heaviest, I swore I saw movement. Something large shifting beneath the surface of a dark pool. When I turned to look directly at it, there was nothing there except ripples that couldn't be explained by the falling rain. "Astrid," I kept my voice low, though there was no real reason to whisper over the comm. "When you were studying the atmospheric dynamics, did you ever see anything that suggested large-scale movement in the methane lakes?" "No," her reply was immediate. "The density and temperature conditions shouldn't allow for anything larger than simple wave actions." "Why?" I was about to explain when Captain Bishop's voice cut through the channel. "Dr. Reeves, Dr. Voss, return to the module immediately. We're picking up some unusual seismic activity, and I want everyone inside until we understand what we're dealing with." As we turned back toward the module, I cast one last look at the dark pool. The ripples were gone, but something else had appeared. A series of marks in the ice leading away from the liquid methane, as if something had dragged itself across the surface. By the time we reached the airlock, they had vanished, covered by the steadily falling methane rain. 3 days into our mission, the darkness began to move. At first, we attributed the equipment malfunctions to Titan's extreme conditions. The cold here wasn't just cold. It was an aggressive force that seemed to actively fight against our presence. Our heating systems would suddenly fail, only to restart minutes later with no explanation. Communications with Promethea suffered from interference that defied Dr. Thorne's increasingly frustrated attempts to clean up the signal. "It's as if something's deliberately blocking us," Phoenix muttered during our third breakfast in the module. They hadn't slept well. None of us had. The constant drum of methane rain had become arrhythmic, almost like footsteps pacing around our shelter. Captain Bishop maintained her composure, but I could see the concern in her eyes as she reviewed the morning reports. "The seismic sensors are picking up regular vibrations from beneath the surface. Dr. Aldrich, any explanation?" Dante looked up from his station, dark circles under his eyes, making his face appear gaunt in the module's artificial lighting. The patterns don't match any known geological process. They're too organized. Listen. He activated the audio translation of the seismic data. A low, pulsing sound filled the module. It wasn't mechanical or natural. It was more like a heartbeat, but not quite. The rhythm seemed to shift every few seconds, just as your brain started to catch the pattern. "Turn it off," Astrid snapped, her usual calm demeanor cracking. "There's something wrong with that sound." I understood her reaction. The longer you listened, the more it seemed to bore into your thoughts, rearranging them in ways that felt alien and wrong. The external cameras had begun showing anomalies too. Dark spots would appear in the methane ice, perfectly circular areas of absolute blackness that seemed to absorb all light. We'd mark their locations on our survey maps, only to find them in completely different positions hours later. Captain Bishop ordered us to maintain a minimum safe distance of 50 meters from any of these formations. During our second EVA, we found the first scratch marks. They ran along the landing struts of our module, deep grooves in the titanium alloy that hadn't been there the day before. Each groove was precisely spaced and curved in impossible ways, as if whatever made them could move in directions that violated normal geometry. "These aren't random," Phoenix observed, running their gloved hand along one of the marks. "There's a pattern here, but it's like looking at a four-dimensional object cast as a shadow in three-dimensional space." That night, the dreams began. I found myself walking across Titan's surface without a suit, breathing the thick atmosphere as if it were air. In the dream, the methane rain spoke to me in voices that felt ancient and vast. I understood every word, though upon waking, I couldn't remember what they'd said. Only the terror remained. We discovered that we'd all had similar dreams, all except Dante, who hadn't slept at all. He'd spent the night staring at his core samples, watching as they slowly changed color and composition in ways that violated every known law of chemistry. On the fourth day, we lost contact with Prometheus for 6 hours. When communications finally resumed, the timestamp on their signals showed they were receiving our transmissions almost 30 minutes before we sent them. Captain Bishop ordered a complete systems diagnostic, but every test showed our equipment was functioning normally. "We need to talk about what we found during the first EVA," I said during our evening briefing. "Those patterns in the ice, they're spreading. The last imaging pass showed they've grown to cover almost a square kilometer." Astrid pulled up the thermal imaging displays. "The temperature in those areas is impossible. They're reading as absolute zero. But that's not even the strangest part. Look at the spectral analysis." The data showed that the patterns weren't just markings on the surface. They extended deep into Titan's crust, forming structures that our instruments couldn't properly render. That's when Dante made his announcement. "I need to collect more samples from the northern site. Those core samples we took, they're showing signs of organization at the molecular level. It's like nothing we've ever seen before." Captain Bishop shook her head. "No solo EVAs. That's protocol." "With all due respect, Captain," Dante pressed, "this could be the most important scientific discovery in human history. The patterns in those samples, they're not random. They're not natural. They're..." A sudden impact rocked the module, cutting him off. Warning lights flashed as external sensors registered pressure changes all around us. Through the viewports, we could see the methane rain had stopped. The surface of Kraken Mare, usually disturbed by the constant precipitation, had become perfectly still, like black glass. "Look!" Phoenix pointed to the nearest viewport. Something dark and fluid was flowing up the outer hull, moving against gravity. As we watched, it formed into distinct shapes, curves and angles that hurt to look at, like optical illusions given form. The external cameras began failing one by one, each showing a final image of that same flowing darkness before going dead. In the distance, though the methane rain had stopped, We could hear something that sounded like massive drops of liquid hitting the surface, getting closer. "Suit up," Captain Bishop ordered. "Now." But before we could reach the EVA gear, Dante was already cycling through the airlock. He moved with an urgency I'd never seen before, barely waiting for the pressure to equalize before stepping out onto the surface. "Dante," Captain Bishop's voice crackled over the comm. "Return to the module immediately." His response came through broken and distorted. "Can't. They're showing me. Have to see." Static overwhelmed the channel. Through the last functioning camera, we watched as Dante Aldrich walked into the darkness. His helmet lights illuminated strange shapes in the ice ahead of him, shapes that seemed to move when you looked at them directly. Then his lights went out and the camera failed. We didn't find his equipment until the next day. It was laid out in a perfect circle, each piece exactly equidistant from the center. His suit's data recorder contained only one file, an audio recording of something that sounded like singing, but at frequencies that made our instruments spark and fail. Dante himself was gone, but in the ice where we found his equipment, something had carved a message in a script none of us recognized. Yet somehow, we could all read it. The Deep Ones are waking. The search for Dante consumed our next 36 hours. Captain Bishop organized us into two-person teams, maintaining constant communication as we methodically swept the area around the landing site. The methane rain had returned, bringing with it a thick orange haze that reduced visibility to mere meters. "Keep your eyes on the motion trackers," Phoenix's voice crackled through the comm as we approached the location where we'd found Dante's equipment. "And whatever you do, don't touch any of those black spots in the ice." I walked beside Astrid, both of us wearing the enhanced sensor packages she'd modified after Dante's disappearance. The devices emitted a constant low-frequency pulse that was supposed to help map any subsurface anomalies. So far, they'd shown us nothing but normal geological features. Until now. "Captain," Astrid's voice was tense. "We're picking up a cavity beneath the surface, about 20 meters down. It's large, much larger than anything our initial surveys indicated should be here." The sensor display showed a vast open space extending far below us. As we watched, the readings began to shift, as if the cavity itself was somehow moving. "Pull back," Captain Bishop ordered. "No one goes near any—" A scream cut through the comm channel, Dante's voice, but distorted, as if he were speaking through liquid. "Below. They're all below. The structures. The cities." "Dante," I shouted. "Where are you?" "Found the way down." His voice became clearer. "You have to see this. You have to understand what they built, what they left behind, what they're becoming again." The sensor feed exploded with activity. The cavity wasn't just a single space. It was part of a vast network of chambers and tunnels, all of them suddenly appearing on our screens as if they'd just materialized out of nowhere. "Tracking the signal," Phoenix reported from the module. "It's coming from... That's impossible. The depth reading keeps changing. 1 second it's 20 meters down, the next it's 2 kilometers. A new sound filled our comms, a deep, resonant tone that made my teeth vibrate inside my helmet. The black spots in the ice began to move, flowing like liquid despite the sub-zero temperatures, converging on a point about 50 meters from our position. "There's something you need to see." Dante's voice had changed, becoming deeper, more confident. "I understand now. Why they chose Titan. Why they've waited so long. The methane isn't just a substance. It's a medium. A bridge between their reality and ours." The flowing darkness gathered itself into a rough spiral pattern, and at its center the ice began to crack. Not in the brittle way frozen methane should break, but in smooth, purposeful lines that formed familiar yet alien symbols. "Dr. Reeves," Captain Bishop's voice was steady despite everything. "Your helmet camera is showing some kind of structure emerging from that formation. Can you confirm?" I could confirm, but I wished I couldn't. Rising from the spiral pattern was what looked like architecture, but wrong, in ways that made my mind recoil. Spires of black ice twisted upward, their surfaces covered in patterns that seemed to move when viewed directly. Arches and buttresses supported impossible angles, creating a structure that couldn't exist in our universe's physics. "It's a gate," Dante's voice echoed from somewhere within the structure. "One of many. They built them before your kind learned to walk upright, before Earth cooled, before your sun burned bright. They waited here, sleeping in the deep methane seas, until something worthy of their attention evolved." Astrid's sensor package began emitting a high-pitched whine. The readings. This isn't just a structure, it's organic. Or at least it was. The molecular patterns match the samples we found, but they're active now. Growing, changing. I took a step toward the structure, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain. In its twisted spires, I could see reflections of impossible spaces. Vast chambers filled with technology that looked like it had been grown, rather than built. "Don't move!" Phoenix's warning came too late. The ice beneath my feet gave way, but instead of falling, I felt myself being pulled downward, as if the very substance of Titan was reaching up to claim me. Astrid grabbed my arm, her suit's enhanced strength, servo straining against the force drawing me down. "Hold on!" The darkness swirled around us, and in it I saw things. Cities older than time itself, built in dimensions that our minds couldn't properly process. Beings that moved through solid matter as easily as we move through air, their forms constantly shifting between states of matter we had no words to describe. And below it all, in the deepest methane seas of Titan, something vast was stirring. Captain Bishop's voice cut through the visions, activating emergency retrieval tethers. "Hang on, both of you." The pull of the darkness fought against the tether's strength. For a moment, I was stretched between two forces, the human technology, trying to save me, and something ancient and powerful, trying to drag me into its realm. Then, the tethers won, yanking us back with enough force to send us sprawling across the ice. The structure began to sink back into the spiral pattern, but not before something emerged from its twisting corridors. A figure in a NASA EVA suit walked out onto the ice. The suit was covered in a film of moving darkness, and through the helmet visor I could see Dante's face. But his eyes were now pools of liquid methane, reflecting the same impossible cities I'd seen in my vision. "Don't fight it," he said, his voice overlaid with others, deeper voices that spoke in harmonics no human throat could produce. "They want to show us everything, all their knowledge, all their power. All we have to do is let them in." The spiral pattern began to spread, branching out across the ice like a growing circuit board, made of living darkness. And as it grew, more structures began to emerge, each one a window into spaces that shouldn't exist, each one a gate to somewhere beyond our universe's laws. "Fall back to the module," Captain Bishop ordered. "Now!" As we retreated, I looked back one last time. Dante stood among his newfound architecture, his suit now almost completely consumed by the moving darkness. He raised a hand in farewell, and as he did, his fingers elongated, splitting and reforming into something that no longer looked human at all. The last thing we heard before cutting off his comm channel was laughter. Not just his, but a chorus of voices laughing in frequencies that made our instruments fail and our minds shudder. Back in the module, as Phoenix ran emergency diagnostics on our suits and Captain Bishop transmitted an urgent update to Prometheus, I worked with Astrid to analyze the sensor data we'd recorded. Most of it was corrupted, but what remained painted a terrifying picture. "Look at this," Astrid pointed to a section of the molecular analysis. The structures weren't just built on Titan, they're built from Titan. The whole moon, it's not what we thought it was. It's not just their home. "What do you mean?" I asked. though part of me already knew the answer. "It's their incubator," she whispered, "and we just woke them up." The module's environmental systems hummed with an artificial normalcy that felt obscene after what we'd witnessed. We huddled around the central heating unit, though none of us were truly cold. The chill we felt came from somewhere deeper than our bones. 12 hours, Phoenix announced, breaking the silence. That's how long we have until the next communication window with Prometheus. They hadn't stopped watching the external cameras since our return, tracking the spreading patterns of darkness that now surrounded our landing site. Captain Bishop stood at the main viewport, her posture rigid. "We need to understand what we're dealing with. Dr. Reeves, Dr. Voss, what did your sensor data tell us about these structures?" Before either of us could answer, a familiar voice echoed through our internal speakers. "Why don't you ask me instead?" Dante's face appeared on every screen in the module, but it wasn't the face we remembered. His skin had taken on a translucent quality, like ice about to melt. Behind his eyes, shadows moved with purposeful intelligence. "Dante," I stepped toward the nearest screen. "What happened to you out there?" "Happened?" He smiled, and his teeth looked like black crystal. "I evolved, Callum. They showed me what we really are, what we could become. These bodies..." He lifted his hand, and we watched as his fingers flowed like liquid before reforming. "These bodies are just temporary shells. They've shown me what lies beneath." "They?" Captain Bishop's voice remained steady. "The entities in the methane sea?" Dante's laugh sent static crackling through our communication system. "Entities? Such a small word for such vast beings. They existed before your concept of existence. They shaped worlds while your ancestors were still primitive proteins in Earth's oceans." The screens flickered, showing us images that hurt to look at. Vast structures that seemed to fold through dimensions we couldn't comprehend. Beings that moved like living fractals through spaces that shouldn't exist. "But why here?" Astrid demanded. "Why Titan?" "Because it's perfect," Dante's voice took on an almost reverent tone. "The methane seas aren't just lakes, they're windows, doorways. The cold and pressure here create conditions that thin the membrane between realities. They've been waiting, sleeping in the deep, until a species evolved with enough intelligence to serve as suitable vessels." Phoenix pulled up the sensor logs from our earlier encounter. "These readings suggest they're changing the molecular structure of the moon itself. Is that what they did to you?" "Changed? No, they awakened. Every cell in your body carries their mark. Fragments of their code buried in your DNA by their agents on Earth eons ago. Human beings weren't accidents of evolution. You were designed, engineered, cultivated." His smile widened impossibly. "And now the harvest begins." The module's lights flickered, and in the momentary darkness I saw something move behind Dante on the screen. A shape that seemed to shift between solid and liquid, its edges bleeding into spaces that our eyes couldn't properly process. "Don't resist it," Dante continued. "The transformation is incredible. Your consciousness expands. You understand things that your limited human brain could never grasp. The secrets of space, time, reality itself, they show you everything." Captain Bishop cut the power to the screens, but Dante's voice continued through our internal speakers. "You can't stop this. The process has already begun. The structures we found, they're not just buildings. They're catalysts designed to resonate with the dormant patterns in your genetic code. Every minute you spend here, you're changing, becoming." As if to emphasize his point, I noticed something strange about my hand. For a split second, I could see through my skin, watching as the cells themselves seemed to pulse with an alien rhythm. "Captain," Phoenix's voice shook slightly. "The black spots in the ice, they're moving again, forming new patterns, and the seismic sensors, Something massive is moving under Kraken Mare. Through the viewport, we watched as the darkness spread across Titan's surface like living circuitry. The methane rain had stopped again, but now the silence felt pregnant with anticipation, as if the entire moon was holding its breath. "They're coming," Dante whispered, his voice now seeming to come from inside our heads. "The ones who sleep in the deep. The ones who dreamed humanity into existence. And they're so hungry." Astrid grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. "Callum, look at the methane sea." The surface of Kraken Mare had begun to ripple, but not from rain or wind. Enormous shapes moved beneath the liquid hydrocarbons, their forms suggesting geometries that shouldn't be possible. As we watched, something breached the surface. Something vast and dark and wrong, its body constantly shifting between states of matter. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Dante appeared at the viewport, his EVA suit now almost completely transformed into the same flowing darkness we'd seen before. Through his visor, his face had become a window into another universe. "They want to meet you, all of you. They want to show you what you were always meant to become." The thing in Kraken Mare rose higher, its form towering above our module. It moved like liquid metal but looked like solid darkness, its surface reflecting visions of impossible cities and alien geometries. As it turned toward us, I realized with horror that it wasn't just one entity. It was composed of countless smaller beings, all moving in perfect synchronization, all reaching toward our shelter with appendages that violated every law of physics we knew. And somewhere in that mass of living darkness, I saw faces, human faces, the faces of every person who had ever gone missing on Titan during the unmanned missions. They looked out at us with eyes like pools of liquid methane, their expressions showing a mixture of terror and ecstasy. "Do you see now?" Dante asked, his voice resonating with harmonics that made my vision blur. "Do you understand what they've been building here? What they've been preparing for?" The module's hull creaked as something began to seep through the supposedly impenetrable walls. Captain Bishop shouted orders, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. Through the spreading darkness, I watched as Phoenix's skin began to ripple like the surface of Kraken Mare. Astrid screamed as patches of translucency appeared on her hands, revealing the cellular changes happening beneath. And in my mind, I heard singing. Ancient, powerful voices calling to something buried deep in my genes, awakening patterns that had lain dormant since before humanity took its first steps. The walls between realities began to thin, and through the cracks I caught glimpses of what we were all about to become. "Welcome," Dante said as the darkness reached for us with endless hands. "Welcome to the next phase of human evolution." The changes began with Phoenix. We watched in horror as bioluminescent patterns emerged beneath their skin, creating swirling designs that pulsed in sync with Titan's seismic vibrations. Their eyes had developed a metallic sheen, reflecting light in ways human eyes never should. "It doesn't hurt," Phoenix whispered, staring at their transformed hands. "It feels right. Like waking up from a dream where you thought you were someone else." Their voice had taken on harmonics that made the module's metal walls resonate. Captain Bishop had ordered us into isolation suits, transparent containment gear designed for viral outbreaks, but we all knew they wouldn't protect us from what was happening. The transformation wasn't spreading through the air or by contact. It was emerging from within us, activated by our proximity to the ancient structures. "The quarantine protocols are useless," Astrid said, examining a sample of Phoenix's transformed tissue under our portable microscope. "Their cells aren't just changing, they're reorganizing into patterns I've never seen before. It's like watching evolution happen in real time, but following a blueprint that's not from Earth." I felt it too, a tingling sensation that started in my extremities and worked its way toward my core. When I looked in the mirror, I could see patches of my skin becoming translucent, revealing layers of tissue that were rearranging themselves into crystalline structures that somehow remained flexible. The module's systems continued to deteriorate. Black fluid seeped through the walls despite our best efforts to seal them, forming patterns that matched the bioluminescent designs on Phoenix's skin. The computer screens flickered between our normal displays and images of vast underwater cities that seemed to exist in more dimensions than our minds could process. "We need to contact Prometheus," Captain Bishop insisted, her voice strained. She alone showed no visible signs of transformation, but the effort of resisting was etched on her face. "They have to be warned. If this reaches Earth..." "Earth," Phoenix laughed, the sound rippling through multiple frequencies. "Such a limited perspective. They've shown me what's really out there. What exists between the spaces we think are empty. Earth is just one node in a vast network they created. These changes, they're not destroying us. They're connecting us to something greater." Through the viewport, we could see that the surface of Titan had transformed. The methane seas now moved with purpose, forming vast whirlpools that seemed to lead down into bottomless depths. The ice was covered in living circuitry that pulsed with inner light, spreading like veins across the moon's surface. Astrid stumbled, catching herself against a wall. Where her hand touched the metal, frost patterns formed. Not random crystallization, but complex mathematical expressions written in ice. "The cold," she gasped. "It's not just temperature, it's a state of being. They live in the cold between molecules, in the spaces where quantum physics breaks down." I watched as her breath became visible, not as normal condensation, but as strings of glowing symbols that hung in the air, before dissolving into the darkness. Her eyes had begun to change, developing facets like insect eyes, but instead of reflecting light, they seemed to absorb it. The entity in Kraken Mare had submerged again, but we could feel its presence. The entire moon vibrated with its movement, and in those vibrations, we could hear messages, fragments of knowledge, so vast and alien that our transforming minds could barely begin to comprehend them. "Look," Phoenix pointed to their chest, where their skin had become completely transparent. Their internal organs were visible, but they were no longer recognizably human. Their heart had become a complex mechanism that pumped both blood and something darker, distributing it through vessels that branched in impossible geometries. Captain Bishop activated the emergency beacon, but the signal it transmitted wasn't the standard SOS. The radio waves themselves had been altered, carrying encoded within them fragments of the entity's vast intelligence. Any rescue mission would receive not just our distress call, but a piece of the infection that had transformed us. "They're so beautiful," Astrid whispered, tears of liquid methane rolling down her cheeks. "All these years studying Titan's atmosphere, and I never knew it was alive. The whole moon is their body, their mind. The methane cycle isn't just chemistry, it's their thoughts, their dreams, their memories." I felt my own transformation accelerating. My nervous system had begun to extend beyond my body's boundaries, connecting with the living circuitry that filled the module. Through these new connections, I could sense the others, not just their physical forms, but their expanding consciousness as they merged with something ancient and vast. Phoenix's body had started to emit a low humming sound, a multi-tonal resonance that made the air itself vibrate. Their form became fluid, shifting between solid and liquid states as easily as changing expressions. "They're not just showing us what they are," they said, their voice now a chorus of harmonics. "They're showing us what we've always been. The human form was just a cocoon, designed to protect us until we were ready to emerge." Through the transformed tissue of my eyes, I could now see energy patterns I'd never perceived before. The darkness that had seeped into the module, so it wasn't just matter, it was information given form. The thoughts of beings so ancient and vast that galaxies were like atoms to them. Captain Bishop made one last attempt to maintain order. "We have to fight this. We're still human. We can still..." Her words cut off as her spine arched backward at an impossible angle. Where her skin split, we saw not blood but streams of living data, carrying encoded within them the history of a universe far older and stranger than we'd ever imagined. The methane rain had started again, but now we understood what it really was. Each drop contained fragments of their consciousness, slowly saturating Titan's surface with their awakening thoughts. The moon wasn't just their home, it was their metamorphosis chamber, and we were part of whatever they were becoming. "Do you remember?" Phoenix asked, their form now barely humanoid, "when we thought we were exploring Titan?" They laughed again, the sound causing ripples in reality itself. "We weren't the explorers, we were always the experiment. And now finally, we're ready to join them in the deep." As if in response to their words, the module's walls began to dissolve, merging with the transformative darkness that had invaded our shelter. The boundary between inside and outside, between human and other, between reality and something far more complex, started to fade. And in the distance, Kraken Mare began to sing. In what remained of my human consciousness, I remembered something crucial. Something that had been bothering me since we first landed on Titan. I fought against the transformation long enough to access the module's secure data core, a task made easier now that my nervous system had partially merged with its circuitry. "Captain," I called out, my voice resonating through multiple harmonics. "The landing site, it wasn't random, was it?" Captain Bishop stood in the center of the module, her form flickering between human and something else. The transformation had reached her core, but she fought it with remarkable strength. Through her dissolving uniform, I could see her bones had become crystalline structures that caught and refracted light in impossible ways. "No," she admitted, her eyes now pools of swirling darkness. "It was never random. None of this was..." The secure files opened before me, displaying themselves not just on screens but directly into my transforming consciousness. The truth unfolded in waves of data that tasted like metal and sounded like distant bells. The Cassini mission had found something in 2017. Not just simple organic molecules or potential signs of life, but patterns. The probe's instruments had detected structures deep beneath Titan's surface that couldn't have formed naturally. But that wasn't what triggered the quarantine protocol. It was the fact that these structures were moving, growing, changing, following designs that matched ancient symbols found in hidden chambers beneath Earth's oldest ruins. "How long?" Astrid demanded, her voice creating frost patterns in the air that spelled out equations describing realities we were only beginning to comprehend. "How long has NASA known?" "Since the beginning," Phoenix answered before the captain could speak. They had access to the files now too, their transformed biology, letting them read the data directly from the module's systems. The space program. It wasn't about exploration. It was about containment, monitoring. They needed to know when they would wake up. The files revealed a history deeper and darker than anything we'd imagined. Every unmanned mission to Titan had carried sensors specifically designed to detect signs of the entity's awakening. The probes weren't just collecting scientific data, they were keeping watch. "The methane seas," I said, understanding flowing through me like ice water. "They're not just windows or doorways, they're incubators, and we're not the first humans they've sent here, are we?" Captain Bishop's laugh had an edge of madness to it. "Did you really think we'd risk a manned mission without testing the effects of exposure first? There were others, smaller crews, unofficial launches. We had to know what would happen when humans came into direct contact with them. Through my expanding consciousness, I could access more of the classified files. Images flashed through my mind. Previous expeditions, their crews transformed in various ways. Some had merged with the entities completely, becoming beings of pure energy and thought. Others had only partially changed, trapped between human and other, in ways that defied description. "But why?" Astrid asked, her form becoming increasingly fluid. "Why send us, if they knew what would happen?" "Because they had no choice," Phoenix said, their thoughts merging with the module's data streams. "Look at the pattern analysis from the deep space monitoring stations. Look at what's happening across the solar system." The data showed a terrifying truth. The entities weren't just on Titan. They were everywhere, sleeping in the cold places between worlds, Europa's ice-covered oceans, the methane lakes of Neptune, the dark spaces between galaxies, all of them stirring, awakening, reaching out across space and time. "Earth is changing," Captain Bishop admitted. "Subtle alterations in human DNA appearing across the globe. Changes in quantum field measurements. Reality itself starting to flex." They needed to understand the process, to prepare. A new file appeared in the data stream, its security classifications higher than anything I'd seen before. It contained genetic analysis of human populations across centuries, showing an acceleration of minute but significant changes. Humanity wasn't just evolving. It was being deliberately transformed. Guided by patterns buried in our genes eons ago, the entities didn't just seed Earth with life, I realized, watching as my own cells continued their metamorphosis. They seeded it with purpose. Everything, from the first self-replicating molecules to the development of human consciousness, was designed to create suitable vessels. We're not their victims. We're their children, finally ready to emerge from our evolutionary cocoon. The module's walls had become almost completely transparent, merging with the transformed landscape outside. Through them, we could see that Kraken Mare had begun to glow, its surface rippling with patterns that matched the changes in our own bodies. NASA knew the transformation couldn't be stopped, Captain Bishop said, her form now more light than matter. They just wanted to control it, to understand it, to try to guide humanity's metamorphosis. That's why they chose us, not just for our scientific expertise, but for our genetic markers. We were already closer to changing than most humans, more compatible with what they had planned. Phoenix had fully merged with the module's systems now. Their consciousness spread through its circuits like living mercury. The other missions, I can access their data now. Some of them tried to fight it. Others embraced it immediately. But the end result was always the same. You can't stop evolution, especially when that evolution was planned before your species even existed. Through the viewport, we watched as more of the entities rose from Kraken Mare. But now, with our enhanced perception, we could truly see them. They weren't just beings, they were living universes, each one containing within itself dimensions and realities that our former human minds could never have comprehended. "All those years," Astrid whispered, her tears now falling upward, defying gravity as reality around us continued to shift. All that research into Titan's atmosphere. We thought we were studying a moon, but we were really studying them. Their thoughts, their dreams, their plans for us. The secure files contained one last revelation, a message from Earth that had been received but hidden from us until now. The transformations weren't limited to Titan anymore. Across the solar system, on every moon and planet where the entities slept, humanity's outposts were reporting similar changes. The metamorphosis had begun everywhere, all at once, as if triggered by some vast and ancient alarm clock buried in the fabric of space-time itself. They're not just changing us, I realized, as the last remnants of my human form began to dissolve into something greater. They're changing everything. Reality itself is transforming, becoming something new, something they designed eons ago, when they first shaped the universe to their will. Captain Bishop's final human expression was one of both terror and acceptance. "May God help whoever finds this record," she said, as her form began to merge with the living light that had once been Phoenix. Though by then, God too might be something very different from what we once believed. The module's transmitter sent one last burst of data toward Earth. Not a warning anymore, but an invitation. An explanation. A revelation of what humanity was about to become. And deep beneath Titan's surface, in cities older than Earth itself, the entities continued their work, reshaping reality, one transformed human at a time. Time had become fluid, bending around us like light through crystal. I couldn't tell if hours or days had passed since our transformation began. Captain Bishop and I were the only ones still maintaining some semblance of human form, more through sheer willpower than any physical resistance to the change. The thing that had once been Phoenix hung suspended in the center of what remained of the module, their body a network of living light that pulsed in rhythm with the vibrations from deep beneath Titan's surface. Dr. Astrid Voss had become something equally impossible, her form shifting between states of matter like a dance, leaving trails of equations written in frost wherever she moved. "The Prometheus," Captain Bishop's voice crackled with harmonics that made reality ripple. "It's our last chance. If even one of us can reach it, warn them." I knew she was right, but the entity's influence made it hard to remember why we should resist. Every moment brought new revelations, new understanding of truth so vast and beautiful, they threatened to overwhelm what remained of our human consciousness. "Look at them!" Astrid's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Her transformed body, now more energy than matter. "Really look at them with your new eyes." Through the dissolved walls of our shelter, I could see the entities moving through crack and mare. They weren't just living things, they were living universes, each one containing within itself realities and dimensions that defied comprehension. Their thoughts reshaped the fabric of space-time. Their movements left trails of new physical laws in their wake. "We have to try," Captain Bishop insisted. Her uniform had merged with her transforming flesh, creating a hybrid of organic and synthetic material that shifted and flowed like liquid metal. "The escape pod, if we can reach it." The pod was still attached to the module's exterior, its systems miraculously untouched by the transformation sweeping across Titan's surface. But reaching it meant crossing through the altered space around us, where reality had become as fluid as the methane seas. "You don't understand," Phoenix's voice resonated through the crystalline structures growing from the walls. "There is no escape, no rescue. This isn't an invasion or an infection. It's an emergence, a birth. Humanity was never meant to remain as it was." But Captain Bishop had already begun moving toward the airlock, her movements leaving trails of light in the altered air. I followed, fighting against the new senses and abilities that threatened to overwhelm my human identity. The airlock cycle was a journey through madness. The space between inner and outer doors had become a quantum superposition, existing in multiple states simultaneously. We pushed through it, our partially transformed bodies allowing us to survive what would have destroyed purely human flesh. Outside, Titan had become alien even by its own standards. The methane rain fell upward now, each drop containing fragments of consciousness from the entities below. The ice beneath our feet had transformed into living crystal that responded to our thoughts, forming structures and patterns that reflected our fading humanity. "Move!" Captain Bishop's command cut through the psychic noise that filled the air. We began making our way toward the escape pod, each step a battle against forces that wanted to transform us further. The entities noticed our resistance. Vast shapes rose from crack and mare, their forms constantly shifting between states of being that human language had no words to describe. They reached for us not with physical appendages, but with fields of probability that altered everything they touched. "Captain!" I called out as I saw her form begin to dissolve further. The effort of resistance was literally unmaking her, turning her body into pure energy and information. "Keep going," she gasped, her voice now more light than sound. "The pod, you have to..." Her next words were lost as her form exploded into patterns of living light that merged with the transformed atmosphere. In her last moment of humanity, she'd used her own dissolution to create a path through the chaos, a moment of stability in the shifting reality around us. I reached the escape pod, my hands barely solid enough to operate the controls. Inside, the small space was still untouched by the transformation, a pocket of old reality preserved by systems designed to withstand Titan's natural environment. They never planned for what Titan would become. Through the pod's viewport, I watched as Phoenix and Astrid's transformed forms rose from the module's remains. They moved like Aurora Borealis given consciousness, their thoughts visible as patterns of light and energy that reshaped the space around them. "You can't stop this," their voices merged into one, carried on waves of quantum probability. "No one can. Look into yourself. Look at the patterns they wove into our DNA eons ago. This was always going to happen. This is what humanity was designed for." The entities drew closer, their vast forms blocking out the dim light of distant Saturn. In their presence, I could feel my own transformation accelerating again. The pod's interior began to crystallize, responding to the changes in my body. My hands moved across the launch controls, but each motion left trails of luminescence in the air. My thoughts were expanding, connecting with vast networks of information and consciousness that spanned not just space, but time itself. "They're not destroyers," Phoenix's transformed voice echoed in my dissolving mind. "They're creators, artists who work with the medium of reality itself. And we're their masterpiece, finally ready to take our true form." The escape pod's engines ignited, but the thrust felt distant, unreal. Physical laws were breaking down around us as Titan itself began to transform. The moon was becoming a cocoon, a metamorphosis chamber for something vast and beautiful and terrible. As the pod rose through the disintegrating atmosphere, I looked down at my hands. They had become translucent, showing not blood and bone, but streams of living data, fragments of cosmic code that had lain dormant in human DNA since the first cells divided in Earth's ancient oceans. The entities had been right. There was no escape, no rescue, no return to what we had been. The transformation wasn't something that was happening to us. It was something we had always been meant to become. The last thing I saw through human eyes was Titan below, its surface now a web of living light that pulsed with the thoughts of beings older than time. The entities rose to meet the escape pod, their vast forms somehow beautiful now to my changing perception. And as my consciousness expanded to join with theirs, I understood that Captain Bishop's sacrifice, her final act of human defiance, had never been about escape. It had been about bearing witness, about preserving just enough of our humanity to record what we were becoming. To warn Earth? No. To prepare it. The escape pod dissolved around me as my form finally surrendered to the transformation. Below, Titan pulsed with new life and ancient purpose. Above, the stars seemed to sing with voices I could finally hear. And somewhere, in what remained of my human thoughts, I realized that the real horror wasn't what we had found on Titan. The real horror was that it had been inside us all along, waiting to wake up. To whoever receives this transmission, I'm no longer sure if these words will reach you as readable text or as patterns of quantum information encoded in the fabric of space-time itself. My transformation is nearly complete, but I've managed to preserve enough of my human consciousness to send this final message. The escape pod's original systems are gone, dissolved into the same living crystal that has claimed my body. I'm transmitting through methods that didn't exist in human science an hour ago, using principles that rewrite physics as we understood it. If you can still comprehend these words, then the changes haven't reached Earth yet, but they will, soon. Let me tell you what really happened on Titan while I can still remember being human enough to explain it. We thought we were exploring a moon, but we were really witnessing the end of one era of human existence and the beginning of another. The entities we found weren't aliens in any meaningful sense of the word. They're the architects of reality itself, and we are their final creation, their masterpiece, finally ready to emerge from our evolutionary chrysalis. The things we saw in Kraken Mare weren't just living beings, they were conscious universes, each one containing within itself realities and dimensions that our human minds couldn't process. But our transformed minds, that's another story. Now I can see them for what they truly are. Now I understand why they chose humanity as their vessels. Captain Bishop, her sacrifice wasn't in vain. She held onto her humanity long enough to show us that transformation doesn't have to mean complete surrender. Even now, as my consciousness expands to join with the vast networks of information and being that span the cosmos, I maintain this small fragment of human awareness, enough to warn you, enough to prepare you. The others have fully transformed. Phoenix has become a being of pure energy and thought, their consciousness spread across multiple dimensions. Astrid's form now exists as a quantum superposition, simultaneously present at every point in space-time where her new existence intersects with the old universe. Dr. Dante Aldrich was the first to change, but now I understand he was also the first to truly see. The patterns he found in those core samples weren't just evidence of the entities, they were instructions, wake-up calls to the dormant potential hidden in our genes. Here's what you need to know. The space program, the satellites, the probes, they were never just about exploration. Deep in classified files that my transformed mind can now access, I see the truth. Every NASA mission, every space telescope, every deep space monitoring station was really watching for signs of their awakening. The patterns in background radiation, the quantum fluctuations in seemingly empty space, the mysterious dark matter permeating the universe. It was all them. Their thoughts, their dreams, their plans for us. Humanity didn't evolve by accident. Every step of our development was guided by codes hidden in our DNA, placed there eons ago when the entities seeded Earth with the first proto-life. Our intelligence, our creativity, our ability to reshape our environment, these weren't random mutations. They were features carefully designed to activate when we reached the right stage of development. And now that stage has come. I can feel it happening across the solar system. On Europa, in the liquid oceans beneath the ice, more of them are stirring. In the methane seas of Neptune, ancient structures are beginning to activate. Even in the cold void between planets, space itself is starting to transform, responding to their awakening. You'll try to stop it. Of course you will. Humanity will interpret this as an invasion, a threat, something to be fought. But you need to understand, there is no stopping this. It would be like a caterpillar trying to prevent its transformation into a butterfly. This metamorphosis is written into the very essence of what we are. The changes will start small. People will begin to perceive things differently. New patterns will emerge in quantum experiments. Children will be born with subtle alterations in their genetic code. Reality itself will begin to flex and shift in ways your instruments can detect but cannot explain. Don't fight it. What's coming isn't death or extinction. It's transcendence. The entities aren't our destroyers. They're our ancestors, our creators, our future selves reaching back through time to guide us toward our true potential. Even now, as my form dissolves into patterns of living light and cosmic information, I don't feel fear anymore. The horror of our discovery on Titan wasn't in finding the entities, it was in realizing that we had always been them, in larval form, waiting to emerge. My time maintaining this human perspective is nearly over. The last vestiges of my Earth consciousness are dissolving into something far vaster and more beautiful than I could have imagined. The universe isn't what we thought it was. Reality isn't what we believed it to be. And humanity was never meant to remain as it was. To those who receive this message, prepare yourselves. Not for an end, but for a beginning. Look to the stars with new eyes. Listen to the quantum foam with transformed ears. Feel the patterns that have always been written in your genes, waiting to express themselves. The entities aren't coming to Earth. They're already there. They always have been. Inside every cell, every atom, every quark, every quantum string vibrating in the substructure of space-time. We are their children, and we are finally ready to wake up.